you.
Sorry, TV Storm.
Mustang 3.
We do what we do.
White 1 says, as of right now, the 20 white lights that are coming from Mercedes Canal.
Down a little bit. Down. Right.
Yeah, there's always one button I forget to press, and this morning it was the audio. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the Speak the Truth podcast. God, you just feel like an idiot sometimes, right? We're a couple minutes away from waiting on the Department of War to go live for a press briefing. It's going to be the first time, basically in history, that we've had citizen journalists, really, that are overwhelmingly like the force over inside the Pentagon. So we are waiting for that to be going down here just in a couple minutes. What's up on your screen right here is footage from Afghanistan of an Apache strike against the Taliban in 2 of their transport vehicles. And it's important, and I think it's important that people watch this video and see what actually happens. And it's up on the screen, particularly with what everybody's complaining about taking place outside of Venezuela. Yeah, I haven't had an audio issue in a while, so I'm feeling pretty blessed this morning to have one. Anyways, you know, there's complaints about the boat being double tapped and everything else. And there is rules that goes to shipwreck survivors and not directly targeting them, just like you're not supposed to shoot, you know, Air Force pilot that's ejected from his aircraft and falling out of the sky, right? None of those things are the case here. Right now, if it just so happened that somehow a helicopter was magically flying and the pilot ejected and he's floating down next to a helicopter and a follow-on strike to destroy that helicopter ends up taking place and the pilot gets blasted by this guy, it's more or less what we're talking about. But this video right here that's up on your screen, this is a perfectly legal strike that took place over inside of Afghanistan by H-64 Apache helicopter against numerous Taliban insurgents and 2 vehicles. Now, you'll notice that the initial strike focused primarily on the fighters themselves, and then the follow-on strike, okay, and there is undoubtedly going to be some survivors out of these things, all right? Like you can see, you know, different guys crawling around after a lot of these different videos. But notice how they go over and they switch and they start targeting those vehicles. Well, that would be the equivalent of what we're seeing taking place down inside of the Caribbean when we're talking about going after those drug vessels, when that boat hasn't completely and totally sunk and it's still up, it's still a threat. The drugs that it's carrying, as long as that boat's floating, can be recovered by those narco terrorists and it can make its way back into the United States of America. Therefore, a follow-on strike is authorized whether or not people are hanging off the side of that boat. And U.S. military personnel do not have to put themselves in danger to go over and fix that situation. Many U.S. personnel have been shot, injured, etc., intercepting these narco terrorists. Therefore, we honestly don't have to worry about it, but that's not how it's being painted over. Now, next thing that we're going to end up looking over today as we go into this following the press briefing is we're going to be paying attention to whether or not the invasion of Venezuela would be considered legal. Did some background and research looking into that, looking into Panama and what the international community said after the U.S. invaded Panama. A lot of people don't even know why we went in there. We're going to talk about that today, how it compares pretty much in a straight linear fashion, minus one key component. And remember, back then, even the international community had said that was illegal. Now, I'm not stating that it is or is not illegal or anything of that nature, but that, you know, we won World War I. All right, Pentagon is live, so we're going to go ahead and get that up on the screen because, again, you know, we have a lot of citizen journalists that are in here. I think Laura Loomer's in there this morning. I want to hear what they have to say when this whole thing kicks off. So we're just kind of sitting here, standing by, waiting to see what statements they have. Donald Trump is supposed to be meeting with essentially, you know, the National Security Panel today over inside of the War Room, and it is said that this meeting today between Donald Trump and everybody else is going to basically be the determination whether or not we actually invade Venezuela. Cam St. Martin says, this is not what you think, TDA drugs cartels. It's more about the rigging of our elections and Maduro, Venezuela's part in it. Cam, I do believe that what you just stated is true, that our elections have been rigged to an extent. that the voting machines and software, but more specifically the software coming out of Venezuela may be a part of this. Trump was looking at doing this crap during his first presidency, but it never really went through. And then we did see that same software being used over inside of the presidential election that he lost. So good question whether or not that's going to be part of it. But I actually think it has more to do with Russian and Chinese influence over inside of the Western Hemisphere than it does drugs. Over 85% of the drugs that enter the United States end up coming through Mexico. Venezuela is a major hub for drug transfers that make their way into the U.S., but that's just not, it's a smaller percentage that's leaving Venezuela and making its way up here. Super Tanker coming in, gifting out 10 Speak the Truth memberships. Thank you very much, sir. And again, we're just sitting here waiting on this Pentagon press briefing to begin for the War Department. And I noticed their little sign up in the corner, most transparent War Department ever. Not so much. Well, while we're waiting on these guys to go live, here they come. They're coming in. All right, let's go ahead and get this show started. We're going to see what they have to say about what's going down. The reason I want to watch this one today is because of the meeting over in the White House and all the allegations that have been getting made. Plus, we have new reporters, so it'll be interesting to see what they have to say. And if we're going to notice a change in questions or how those questions are worded. I'm just super, super curious to see how this goes. I'm pretty sure Cam Higby's in there and lots of others. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, to be perfectly honest. But they tricked us, man. You can't just come in and set things down and pretend like this whole thing's about to kick off, you bastards. You done screwed us over. Super Tanker, thank you very much for gifting out those memberships as we sit here and wait for this sucker to kick off. I do, again, I'm going to stress the importance of a lot of the different things that are taking place right here. There is a very good possibility at this point in time that the U.S. conducts airstrikes inside of Venezuela. However, as far as a ground invasion goes, I don't think that is a real probability right now. I'm not saying it's not a possibility, but probability that could be taking place. Yes, it is a possibility. It's just highly improbable to me. And I'm going to explain why up here in a little bit when we take a look at what happened with Panama. There's different U.S. interests over inside of Panama than we have here in this case when it goes down to Venezuela, right? We do have a radical dictator in both cases. We do have narco drug trafficking in both cases. We do have different U.S. interests, if you will, but those interests are very, very different. And so that is going to be the delineating factor, in my opinion, for why the U.S. cannot legally invade Panama. And I think Donald Trump knows that. However, bullying and like actually sitting outside there and forcing him in, I mean, that is a very, very good sign, in my opinion, for what's to come. So I think we are, see, Mike Darn down in the comment section says ground invasion unlikely. Linda Lou coming in and gifting us Speak the Truth membership. All right, let's listen in.
So good morning and welcome to the Department of War. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to recognize and honor Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, the guardsman who was murdered in D.C. this past weekend. She is an American hero and we will never forget her service and sacrifice. While we mourn her loss, we will continue to pray for the full recovery of Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, the other service member critically injured in this heinous attack. This attack on our National Guardsmen in D.C. follows months of Democrat elected officials demonizing the National Guard, portraying them as a threat to our republic, and attempting to sow discord in their ranks. To name a few examples, Governor Gavin Newsom claimed that President Trump was fabricating emergencies in order to justify the deployment of the National Guard in some major cities. Governor J.B. Pritzker claimed that the deployment of the National Guard amounted to an attack on the American people. Outside an ICE facility in California, Rep. Maxine Waters taunted the troops standing guard and demanded to know whether they intended to shoot her. And of course, the seditious six urged members of our military to defy their chain of command in an unprecedented, treasonous, and shameful conspiracy to sow distrust and chaos in our armed forces. This rhetoric
Fox McCloud, dude, you're killing me inside.
Every day to keep Americans safe, and it creates an environment where criminals feel emboldened to commit violent acts against them. Right now, over 2,200 National Guardsmen from all across the country are serving as a part of Joint Task Force DC, with an additional 500 on the way. Each one of them will continue working to ensure the safety of all who live, work, and visit the district. We will not lose sight of our mission. This targeting will only embolden our resolve. Our warriors are strong, and we will not back down until our capital and our cities are secure. Defending our homeland and rescuing America's greatest cities from from endemic violence is the highest and best use of our military. I would also like to take a moment today to welcome all of you here to the Pentagon briefing room as official new members of the Pentagon Press Corps. We're glad to have you. Legacy Media chose to self-deport from this building, and if you look at the numbers...
Okay, I don't understand why they're getting extremely political at the Pentagon. I don't really agree with that. Fox McCloud says, donate money so that we can get Matt a press pass so we can pants check him at a briefing. Thanks, man. Dark Horse, being a Venezuelan myself, I'm just happy that the people are finally noticing the problem with this regime. Most Venezuelan people inside and outside have wanted the U.S. to take them out. Yeah, I'd agree with that statement. Colby McCurdy, 2 hits just means less time dealing with the situation. Efficiency is underrated. In my opinion, Colby, it's not very efficient to use 2 bombs. It'd been more efficient to use just 1 bigger bomb and just call it a day.
Look forward to working with you to keep the American people informed and to ensure transparency. In the interest of transparency, I want to provide an update on the department's operations against narco-terrorists in the Western Hemisphere. To date, there have been a total of 21 kinetic strikes on drug boats in our hemisphere, with 82 narco-terrorists killed. Each strike conducted against these designated terrorist organizations is taken in defense of vital U.S. national interests and to protect the homeland. Our operations in the Southcom region are lawful under both U.S. and international law, with all actions in compliance with the law of armed conflict. These actions have also been approved by the best military and civilian lawyers up and down the chain of command. A completely fake story in the Washington Post, now discredited by the New York Times, tried to mischaracterize these successful strikes in bad faith. It was an attempt to damage the secretary and the president, and the people saw through it. The phony Washington Post story even attributed statements to the secretary that were totally fabricated. He never said them. That is the epitome of fake news. As the White House confirmed yesterday, the decision to restrike the narco-terrorist vessel was made by Admiral Bradley, operating under clear and long-standing authorities to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States was eliminated. Secretary Hegseth stands behind Admiral Bradley 100%. Admiral Bradley made the right call, and unlike the previous administration, we have our warfighters back at this department. This department will defend our homeland. This is not a catchphrase, it is a commitment. And as the Secretary said, when it comes to killing narco-terrorists, we have only just begun. Lastly, I would like to announce that the War Department has created a new division for strategic marketing that will be led by Abby Lower, who will hold the title of Deputy Assistant to the Secretary of War for Strategic Marketing. The division will be a new core function within public affairs and will complement our media and strategic engagement teams. The purpose of this new division is to create marketing campaigns that support the War Department's military recruitment efforts, providing a halo effect to the great work the military services are already doing to recruit our nation's warfighters. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions. Yes, Caitlin.
Thanks, Kingsley. Can you talk about the autonomy that's given to the commanders who are carrying out these operations, like Admiral Bradley, to make decisions? Like in this case, I'm assuming the first strike took out the boat and any actions that followed. Can you talk about the autonomy they're given?
Absolutely. So the Secretary has been very clear in every statement that we've released about these strikes that they are presidentially directed. And the chain of command functions as it should. And we make sure that commanders on the ground are taken, their positions are taken into account, and they are able to tell us and make decisions if they see things that need to be flagged. But at the end of the day, the Secretary and the President are the ones directing these strikes. And any follow-on strikes like those which were directed by Admiral Bradley, the Secretary 100% agrees with. Yes, Matt.
Kingsley, if Nicolas Maduro leaves Venezuela today, what role will the Department of War have in a post-Maduro Venezuela? And describe the process the administration will use to determine whether or not current members of the Venezuelan military or Venezuelan government have a role in a post-Maduro Venezuela.
Thanks for the question. So the department has a contingency plan for everything. We are a planning organization. If anything were to happen around the world, we have a response planned and ready. So we stand at the president's beck and call, our commander-in-chief, to do what is needed if called upon. And that will be what this department continues to focus on and continues to prepare for.
Yep, she's avoiding that question. I want to thank Ema Guy, whatever, however you say your name, ma'am, for coming in and gifting out 5 Speak the Truth memberships. Danny Golan brought up a good point. He said, highly unlikely the election software was rigged. Venezuela pays Russia and Iran in gold bars for ship-to-ship oil transfers to avoid sanctions. Also, Iran built a big drone factory in Venezuela. I totally forgot about that drone factory.
Saying there was this desire to name every Ba'athist a terrorist. Does the administration take the view that any person who served in the Venezuelan military or Venezuelan government is definitionally a narco-terrorist?
That would be a determination for the president to make, but I can tell you that every single person who we have hit thus far who is in a drug boat carrying narcotics to the United States is a narco-terrorist. Our intelligence has confirmed that, and we stand by it. Yes, Monica.
Thanks, Kingsley. I have 2 questions, if I may. For your first question regarding Sarah Beckstrom, the 20-year-old West Virginia National Guardswoman who was shot and killed, was her family offered an Arlington burial, and or will there be plans to do so?
I know that the White House is working that out, so they might be better to describe what the plans are for that. But this department will, of course, support in any way we can, and have been, in close contact with the family, and the secretary will continue to do so. So we'll keep you all updated on that.
Thank you. And my second question regarding Iran, there are reports that Iran's been planning on rebuilding its nuclear facilities. Iranian's president has said that it plans to rebuild its nuclear facilities with, quote, greater strength. Can you provide us on any sort of update on where that currently stands?
I can tell you that Operation Midnight Hammer was an absolute resounding success. Iran's nuclear capabilities were totally obliterated, and experts estimated that, it would take 2 years for them to recover. So thanks to President Trump's bold and swift action, we were able to dismantle that threat to the American people. And I think it was also a historic operation by virtue of the fact that there was a clear end state. We have seen this department get marred down in the Middle East in endless wars, in nation building. That has stopped under this president and this secretary. We now have a clear end state, a clear mission set, and Operation Midnight Hammer was a success in dismantling that. Yes, Laura.
Thanks so much for having me here today. Now that the president has started the process of designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign Islamic terrorist organization, will the Department of War still proceed with selling F-15 fighter jets to Qatar? And how will they be able to train Qatari pilots at their air base in Idaho if Qatar is included in the designation?
Thank you for the question. We take very seriously our partnerships, and we always do thorough evaluations to make sure that they protect our intelligence, our operational security, and that they serve the best interests of.
For those of you that don't know, that question was actually misframed. It's not a Qatari base. It's actually a U.S. base with Qataris that are going to be there in order to train their pilots. The expansion was approved due to an agreement and sale of aircraft to Qatar. And in addition to that, that new expansion is also going to include U.S. personnel because they're going to be the trainers
there as well. So it is a base that we do a lot of foreign military training, and we are thankful for those partnerships, and we'll continue to evaluate all of those to make sure, again, that national security is protected. That is the Secretary's utmost priority.
But given the fact that the Qatari royal family and Qatar itself is the biggest financier, along with Turkey, of course, the financier of the Muslim Brotherhood, would that relationship and partnership be reevaluated since the designation could possibly include Qatar?
I'm not tracking any reevaluation at this time, but again, the Secretary really keeps national security top of mind, and this administration does as well. So we will always make sure that American assets are protected. Yes.
Hi, David Zier, Real America's Voice. It's great to be here. I want to know if you can confirm any additional National Guard deployments under Title 10 in additional cities, and have any governors reached out for help under Title 32 as well? And how do you determine how National Guard troops, how many are armed?
Great question. So I don't have anything to announce at this time in terms of new deployments, but I can tell you that our mission set is critical. We are keeping American cities safe all across this country, and we are going to remain committed to that. These missions aren't going to stop in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in D.C. We understand the urgent threat that is facing many of these cities, and the National Guard is proud to step in alongside our law enforcement partners to help with that. And I can confirm that everybody in D.C. is now armed, and a lot of our DC National Guardsmen are now also doing joint patrols with members of the police department here in DC. So their safety is, of course, top of mind, and we will continue to make sure that they're able to do their jobs in keeping all of our great Americans safe across our cities. Yes, Bradley.
We're now 90 days into these Venezuelan drug boat strikes. A growing number of members on Capitol Hill are getting their mettle up with regard to war powers. If they do move forward with some sort of war powers effort, will the administration seek to challenge the validity of the war powers resolution, or will it comply?
I wouldn't want to get ahead of the president's decision-making process in regard to Venezuela, but I can tell you what I mentioned earlier is that the department is a planning organization. We are always ready. We have plans.
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, Senator Chuck Schumer came out and said that if Trump even hints that he's going to end up invading Venezuela, that they're going to push immediate legislation to essentially strip him because they haven't declared war over on Venezuela. So that's why he's pushing it. And we're going to talk about that later.
No military operations within Venezuela. Nevertheless, members of Congress are increasingly calling for regime change there. What's the Department of War's message to those members of Congress?
The Department of War stands behind the president 100%, and we will execute on the orders that our commander-in-chief gives us, and we're proud to do so. That will continue. And again, any decision that is going to be made about certain military actions in the Western Hemisphere region will be the president's alone. Yes.
Todd Wood from CBM's Armed Forces Press. There's been a lot of reporting that, yes, it's about drugs in Venezuela, but also possibly about election fraud electronically. Do you have any comment on that? And also, are assets, we've heard that Special Operations Aviation assets are exercising for direct action missions in that region. Can you confirm that at all?
On your first question, I would refer you to the State Department. I think they would probably be able to give you a better answer on that.
Can you tell us whether or not U.S. Special Operations troops are about to go whoop butt inside of Venezuela? No, idiot.
Down there in the Southcom region. And as I said, the department's a planning organization. So a big part of that planning is doing trainings and make sure that we're ready at a moment's notice to protect our interests and to protect the American people from narco-terrorism. Yes, RC.
Has there been a determination at this point from the Army Secretary on a Distinguished Service Medal for Specialist Sarah Beckstrom?
I would refer you to the Army for that, and if I hear anything, I will keep you posted. That would be wonderful news. Yes, James.
Hi, James O'Keefe. Nicholas Terza, branch chief here at the Pentagon, was caught on a video in the spring stating, quote, Trump is illegitimate. We're going to resist him, quote, everything he does. Mm-hmm. We know there are other people like this that work here. My question is, what steps is the Department of War taking to identify and address personnel who are in the self-described resistance movement?
Thank you for the question. That's why the work you all do is so important. This is a big building, and we want to make sure that we have the absolute best people working at it to protect Americans every single day. We don't take lightly what every single civilian and military person in this building do every single day. They do a lot of hard work, and we want to make sure that they're up to the task and that they're on board and willing to serve our commander-in-chief, who was elected by the whole of the American people to serve as our president. And we support him 100% here at the Department of War. That is our mission. That is our chain of command. So personnel is policy. The Secretary has said that many times, and I know you all in this room are aware of that as well. That was really the crux of his speech at Quantico not long ago to the generals. Our people are our most important asset. So we will continue to make sure that our people are consistently putting America first. That's something we care very much about. Yes, Alex.
Thanks, Kinsley. Are there plans to host or hold more of these regular press briefings? And if so, how frequently?
Absolutely, we'd love to. It'd be great to get everybody in here. I know we have the Christmas holiday coming up, but we'd love to make it a weekly or bi-weekly tradition. So we're excited to have you all in the Pentagon for those.
And we will be receiving more readouts of the Secretary of War's meetings, with the President yesterday, much like the State Department and the White House that provide readouts and scheduling and things like that. Will we be receiving more of those?
Absolutely. In the interest, as I said in my opening, in the interest of transparency, we want to make sure that you all are informed. That's a commitment we take seriously. Obviously, we're slightly different than other agencies in that we have national security and operational concerns, but we will tell you as much as we can because we want the American public to know all the incredible things that our warfighters are doing every single day and all the amazing initiatives the Secretary is pursuing here at the Department of War. Yes.
Thanks, Kingsley. Jordan Conrad from Gateway Pundit. I wanted to ask you, in May, the Secretary announced a new investigation into the Afghanistan withdrawal under Biden. In light of the recent events with one of these refugees killing a service member, Is there any updates on that investigation?
I don't have any updates for you at this time, but I can tell you that the review that we're doing into the horrendous Afghanistan withdrawal under the previous administration, the Biden administration, is expected to be complete by summer of 2026. And we are committed to ensuring that this review, unlike others, is much more unredacted, that the American people are able to consume the report for themselves and see what truly happened on that fateful day and that fateful withdrawal. And we owe it to our service members to accomplish that. The review is being led by our chief Pentagon spokesman and senior advisor to the Secretary, Sean Parnell, an Afghan veteran himself, and he takes very seriously the responsibility to getting answers to the American people. So we are committed to that 100%. And in summer 2026, the public will be able to have that report.
Summer of 26.
Question for you in regard to the Afghan withdrawal. When we brought all these migrants onto military bases, or these refugees onto military bases, we saw a surge in assault immediately after, sexual assault and physical assaults. And then all of a sudden, under the previous administration, we no longer learned of anything that was happening anymore on these military bases. Does this Pentagon plan on giving us some type of criminal data on that to see what actually happened when they were brought onto these military bases? And do we have any status updates on like FBI investigations and such?
So for FBI investigations, anything that would be a criminal law enforcement matter would obviously be something to direct to the Department of Justice, as we cannot speak to that from our perch here at the Department of War. But what I can tell you is that we are aware of a lot of that activity that went on. It's despicable. One is too many, right? And we understand that the Biden administration unfortunately put our troops and our country last in many cases. The Secretary is committed to correcting that. And I think that's what you're going to see going forward. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about Somalia, which isn't talked about very much, but we have done 101 strikes in Somalia in 2025. And there was another.
All right. I got a feeling that they are not going to get to the crux of the issue here, which is the meeting that's going to be taking place later today and whether or not the U.S. is on a serious consideration to invade Venezuela, because that is the question I think is on everybody's mind, and yet these people just aren't flat out asking questions. You're going to ask whether or not special operations troops can go behind the border, but not whether or not the U.S. military plans on a full-blown invasion, for the love of freaking God. That drives me nuts. Incock Verde coming in with 20 saying, screw Schumer. Tom Bone says, doesn't the president have, if I am mistaken, 90 days to act without a declaration of war? The president can act, and within 48 hours, he's got to notify Congress. War Powers Resolution in 1973 says that national emergency caused by an attack on the U.S.'s territories or its forces or hostilities short of war, where the president urges he has inherent constitutional authority. But president, like I said, has to notify Congress within 48 hours, and the military operations have to end within 60 days, not 90. And it allows for 30 days for a withdrawal from the area. And yeah, there's all sorts of other things that end up going into that, brother. So it's a pretty complicated question to actually answer over here, but not opposed to bringing it up. Dark Horse says part of the IRGC and Hezbollah have a lot of Margarita Island as a front to funnel money and gold. A good friend of mine that used to fly gold from the Amazon. Holy freaking crap. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me either. Yeah. Let's see, where are they at now?
Yes, Ryan.
Thank you, and thank you for doing this press briefing. I wanted to get back to the Southcom strikes real quick, just broadly speaking, not specifically about the September 2nd strike, but broadly speaking, are we doing any kinds of post-strike assessments to determine that the intelligence that informed those strikes was accurate? Are we recovering any drugs on board those vessels? You mentioned each vessel struck is equivalent of 25,000 overdose deaths. So are we mostly picking up fentanyl or cocaine or what have you? What's going on with these boats? Like, what's on these boats?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I can tell you in terms of your question about intelligence that our intelligence absolutely confirms who these people are. And I can't get into right from this podium how we know that. I don't want to communicate to the enemy the ways in which we're carrying out these strikes. But I can tell you that without a shadow of a doubt, every single one of our military and civilian lawyers knows that these individuals are narco-terrorists. We know what their carrying, where they're coming from, and where they're going. And they are trying to bring drugs to our shores that kill and hurt American citizens. The president takes that very seriously, and when he designated these groups designated terrorist organizations, that opened up a lot for us here at the Department of War. We can engage in ways that we never could before. So that's all I can say at the moment on that topic, but I can 100% affirm that we know without a shadow of a doubt who these narco-terrorists are. Yes, Wade.
So you were speaking earlier about the Washington Post report concerning the Secretary of War and Admiral Bradley. And my question is, does the Department of War plan on pursuing any sort of legal action against the Washington Post? And what consequences will there be for lying to the American people? Because, of course, the implication there was that Pete Hegseth and Admiral Bradley are war criminals. And that was the implication, and that's what a lot of people on social media were saying after the fact. So could you speak
it's
to
so
that?
ridiculous.
Yeah,
is the Department of War going to bring charges?
It's disgusting that the Washington Post.
Are they going to bring charges? Like, get over it, man. No, they can't do that. That would violate the First Amendment. North SAC 333, what a dong and pony show. More smoke and mirrors. I wish they were straightforward about their actual mission in Venezuela. It's not about dope. I would totally agree with you on that statement. You don't move over 30% of the United States Navy's deployable force down outside of Venezuela to blow up 21 pontoon dinghies that are hauling butt across the ocean. I understand. Right. I understand exactly the implications of those strikes and how many lives were saved, but I'm with you on that. Not nearly enough drugs poured out of Venezuela into the United States to warrant the deployment of such a large chunk of our force. It's freaking huge, and you guys are going to get great examples
like we do from all of you. We told them this story was completely fake news on Thanksgiving evening with a 3-hour deadline, and they still published it anyway. It's disgraceful, but thankfully the American people see through it. Yes, Jack.
Kingsley, does the Secretary's office or the Pentagon in general, the department, have a message for Senator Wicker, who as a Republican has now backed this inquiry into Secretary Hegseth, again, accusing him of war crimes? It seemed strange to see a Republican going after one of President Trump's own cabinet members.
So I can confirm that the Secretary of War spoke with Senator Wicker, and they had a good conversation where he was able to explain to him a lot of the rationale behind these strikes. And we work closely with all of our partners on the Hill, whether Republican or Democrat, to keep them up to date on what this department is doing in regards to the strike. So we will continue to do that, and we'll continue to brief members of HASC and SASC, and we look forward to continuing those relationships.
Quick follow-up, you mentioned working with partners on the Hill. Another senator on the Hill, the Democrat side, is Senator Mark Kelly. Now, we heard some reporting about a possible investigation into him regarding his status as a retired member of the United States Navy, still on pension, and therefore still under the jurisdiction of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And as such, his membership, you mentioned the seditious six, would that be grounds for possibly bringing him back to active service for an investigation, for NJP, or even a full court-martial?
So you're correct. The Department of War received serious allegations of misconduct against Senator Mark Kelly, and in accordance with the Uniform Code of Military Justice and other applicable recommendations and regulations, we're doing a thorough review of all of these allegations. And the Secretary of War has tasked the Secretary of the Navy, John Phelan, with doing a thorough review, looking into all of these allegations and providing him an update on December 10th. So we will have more information to come on that. But I would just add that this despicable video that Mark Kelly participated in with the seditious six was a politically motivated influence operation that was an attempt to undermine the chain of command, to sow distrust and division in our armed forces. That is absolutely ridiculous, and it puts our warfighters at risk. And again, he doubled down on the Sunday shows. I don't know if you all saw him on the Sunday shows, but he basically insinuated that service members who do not defy President Trump's orders could face potential prosecution in the future when Democrats are back in power. He even called our troops and likened them to those of the Russian military. This is totally disgraceful from an elected official, and the department takes it very seriously, and that is why we have launched this review.
And just to be clear, so if Secretary Phelan were to recommend court-martial, that would be on the board?
What was the question? Sorry.
If Secretary Phelan were to recommend court-martial, that could be an option on the table?
All options are on the table at this moment in time, and we look forward to getting the Secretary of the Navy's review. And the Secretary of War has been very clear in his statements as well that he takes this extremely seriously, and it is unacceptable. That's all the time I have today. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you coming out.
And there you go. As far as that goes, there's your briefing for the day, ladies and gentlemen, and they are done with it. Incog Faraday coming in at the very end, giving out 5 Speak the Truth membership. So not a whole lot of information actually ended up coming out of that other than the fact that they ended up standing up for the commander that ended up conducting that strike that everybody is so dang scared about, and I don't understand why. And as they'd stated, Senator Mark Kelly was very, very upset about the strikes that are taking place over on the cartels, but all the way back in, 2021, I believe? Yeah, September 28th, 2021. There was an airstrike that ended up killing 10 Afghan civilians. And he interviewed General Kenneth McKenzie about this. And you would be shocked to hear how simple it is that Kelly ends up dismissing this allegation.
Okay, well, thank you. And I know you can't go into much detail about the analysis that led to the August 28th drone strike in Kabul in this open setting, but I would like to note my serious concerns and give you the opportunity to make any comment on how the American people can know that the military will be able to adequately assess targets before conducting future strikes and operations, even as we have even fewer local intelligence and surveillance resources to leverage.
Senator, again, the matter's under investigation, but what I can tell you broadly, and to restate some things I've said earlier, I am responsible for that. It happened in my area of responsibility, so I'm the responsible officer for that strike. Moreover, I was under no pressure, and no one in my chain of command below me was under any pressure to take that strike. We acted based on the intelligence read that we saw on the ground. We acted several times on intelligence that we saw, and we were successful in other occasions in preventing attacks. This time, tragically, we were wrong. And you're right to note that as we go forward and our ability to create what we call the ecosystem that allows you to see what's going on the ground and put all that together, it's going to get a lot harder to do that, particularly in places like Afghanistan. But I can share a little more with you later.
Well, thank you, General.
That's it. All right. And why is this important to bring up Kabul? Because this is of a later strike, all right, that ended up taking place after the U.S. ended up withdrawing, and you have 10 civilians that ended up being killed as a result of the strike, including children. And yet Mark Kelly sat there and he just kind of wished the whole thing away, gave the general a chance to make an excuse for it, and not a big deal. But when it comes down to the strikes over in Venezuela, well, all of a sudden it's a huge issue, right? All of a sudden you're blowing up narco terrorists and you're trying to take out their boat. And it's an illegal strike and military members need to disobey the law. Yet all the way back in 4 years ago, this is just 4 years ago, underneath the Biden administration, he didn't give a crap about kids over in Afghanistan dying. Now, lives are the same. And so if it's not for political talking points, pushing, trying to undermine the chain of command, why would he do that? This is the type of evidence, all right, that the United States government is going to look at when it goes down to whether or not sedition did in fact take place. And you just heard it from the Pentagon. If he ends up getting accused of that, or if they end up stating that that is going to happen, he is going to get court-martialed. They're going to bring him up and they're going to court-martial him. He wasn't the only one that ended up dismissing it so quick either. John Kirby, former spokesperson for the Department of Defense back then.
How does it strike you that no one is held accountable? Because I know how it strikes a lot of people around the world that you can get away with murder and nobody's punished for it.
I do understand that. We appreciate that not everybody's going to support this decision. What I can tell you is we looked at this thing very, very comprehensively. And again, we acknowledge that there were procedural breakdowns. Processes were not executed the way they should have been. But it doesn't necessarily indicate that an individual or individuals have to be held to account for that. But look,
is there discipline inside the Pentagon at all? I mean, maybe there are no charges brought up, but is anyone demoted or disciplined for what happened that day?
What we are going to do, there's not going to be individual discipline as a result of this, Willie, but what we are going to do is learn from this, and we're going to enact and improve our procedures and our processes to try to make sure this doesn't happen again.
You know, I see that comment down in there that says 2 wrongs don't make a right. Well, there's only one wrong, and the wrong was killing the civilians, but even that's going to be driven based on intel. So I might actually agree with what they're saying. If I had access to all the intelligence that actually went into the strike over inside of Kabul, I might have said, look, they did their best. There's nothing that they really did wrong. It's just an unfortunate situation. These different types of things happen when conducting warfare. But in the case of the terrorists down outside of Venezuela, it's completely and totally different. Where you have good intelligence on the boat that's driving out. Nobody is complaining and saying that intelligence was bad and that those were civilians that were killed on that boat. As a matter of fact, they in agreement across the board that you have narco terrorists that were on that boat. And when we take a look at the actual footage of that day that ended up getting released, let me see if I have it here. Yes, I do. When we take a look at the actual footage of that day, get that up on the screen here. You guys can see the boat traveling through the water, and then you're going to see the strike. And immediately following the strike, what you're going to end up seeing is that the boat still exists. All right, it's moving. It looks like it was an airburst munition. It didn't impact the vessel itself. It looks like it bursted over the top of it. And you could definitely see fire inside of the boat, but the boat still exists. Now, just because, look at that, the boat's still moving, it's not sinking, it's just literally sitting there. Now, if that's the case and it's there, could they have let it burn? Could they have let that happen? You're looking at it through like thermals and things like that. If we go back and we take a look at it, all right, it is possible that boat, like all of that fire and stuff from the munition, ended up going away and that boat still existed. And they are going to want that sucker down at the bottom of the ocean. And this is why I brought up that first video of the Apache killing those insurgents over inside of Afghanistan, and then immediately following up on side of those vehicles, because that vehicle right there that you see, that vessel is actually the target that they're after. And that was confirmed yesterday over inside of the White House. All right. So the White House yesterday admitted that there was a follow-on strike to that incident, but that boat is clearly not sunk. It's still up there. And the fact that people are trying to claim that the people were holding on to the side of it and then Hegseth ended up ordering for them just to go and take it. And people are going, oh, no way. No, that's a very real thing. Right. And so this will happen. Okay. Now, like I said, yesterday, they did end up coming out and stating, right, the White House itself in this statement right here, she states very clearly two things. She states, number one, that the target was the boat, and number two, that there was a follow-on strike and that it was authorized by the commander and that it was legal and that they're backing them.
Caroline, excuse me, regarding Venezuela, the president said yesterday that Secretary Hegseth had denied that second strike, that reported second strike on an alleged drug boat on September 2nd. The secretary said to the president that didn't happen. But to clarify, I just wanted to clear this up. In his social media post, Secretary Hegseth didn't go into details about that strike. He just said U.S. operations in the area were lawful, and he said that the story and media reports were fabricated. So to be clear, does the administration deny that second strike happened, or did it happen and the administration denies that Secretary Hegseth gave the order?
The latter is true, Abe, and I have a statement to read for you here. President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated. And I would just add one more.
And that's the point. To ensure that the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated. So what was the target? The target was the boat, and the threat to the United States was the drugs that the boat was carrying. The fact that there's people clinging to the side of the boat, let's say even that's true, is irrelevant. It's just as irrelevant as the people being on the boat during the initial strike. The boat did not get destroyed. Had the boat been destroyed, there wouldn't have been a follow-on strike. But because the boat was not destroyed, there was a follow-on strike targeting the vessel itself to ensure that those drugs were not recovered by the narco-terrorists and to ensure that it went down to the bottom of the ocean into Davy Jones's locker. But because it wasn't destroyed, a follow-on strike was authorized. And there is nothing illegal about that, regardless of how they try to spin it or push this situation. Why? Number one, you have the Secretary of State that designated them a foreign terror organization. You also have the authority from the president that got passed down to the SecDef, that got passed down to the Department of War and eventually the Southcom commander in order to start engaging these vessels. That is what actually makes it legal. A lot of people might not like it, but that's what's been passed inside of our legislation, and that's how it's written. And if you want to change our laws, then you change our laws. You don't go about the people that are enforcing those laws and say that they're committing illegal acts just because you don't like how it is. That should be on Congress to pass better worded laws so that we don't sit around and have these stupid discussions all day long. And I find it extremely funny that they ended up finding something new to complain about immediately following that shooting that took place, and trying to put all of the attention over on this other, thing. So far, looks like the State Department has revoked right around 80,000 visas. So they're all like getting freaking booted out of the country. But I don't even want to focus on any of that crap right now. I'll focus on something else a little bit later. And what I'm going to focus on right now is exactly this, which is what Trump had actually put out this morning. Let me get this up on the screen.
Congresswoman Omar, because of questions about federal tax fraud, federal immigration fraud, federal student loan fraud.
I'm sorry, that's the wrong clip. I was completely looking at the wrong clip. But they basically said that, Maduro's time is running out. So don't worry about that. Now, what does it look like? All right. What does it look like? So far, we have the Secretary of Defense, even though they're saying that they're trying to pass the buck off onto the Admiral, comes out perfectly clear. All right. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth said, and I quote, "Let's make one thing crystal clear. Admiral Mitch Bradley is an American hero, a true professional, and has my 100% support. I stand by him and the combat decisions he has made on the September 2nd mission and all others since. America is fortunate to have such men protecting us. When this Department of War says we have the back of our warriors, we mean it. There is absolutely nothing illegal that ended up being conducted during that strike. And until the actual evidence is released, well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that it just needs to kind of go away." Now, this lady here ends up asking a very good question. I want you guys to listen.
Well, first of all, the story has been massively misreported. So you have actual headlines saying that Hegseth gave the order for the second hit. That wasn't in the initial Washington Post article, which claimed that following, by hearsay, somebody claimed to have heard Hegseth say, "We have to kill everybody." Therefore, the Admiral gave the second hit. So I just want to clear that up. I think that's why Hegseth wrote the tweet, is to just correct the record. But what I don't understand is it is the Secretary of State's right to determine who is a terrorist and who isn't. The Secretary of State answers to the executive branch. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has determined that these boats are carrying terrorists, which makes the attacks on them legal. Correct. And the only question is whether that boat was disabled or whether it was destroyed. If it was destroyed, how were there still live people clinging to it? And if it was only disabled, let me just finish the point, then it was still a threat, meaning it was still a legitimate target. So I'm very confused. And by the way, I've spoken to a lot of veterans today who are also very confused by all of this bipartisan outrage. I don't get it.
Good thing we have.
Yeah, and she makes the same valid point that anybody else with a rational thinking brain would make. And so with that being said, I'm kind of done with that whole thing. And what I really want to move on to and focus on is whether or not the U.S. is legally justified when it goes to invading Venezuela. And there is a big parallel drawn. Let me pull this up here. Because I want you guys to understand and see this. CNN lied. I'm shocked. Yeah. I mean, CNN most definitely didn't tell the truth as far as, I'm concerned. It's freaking shocking to me that was a thing. So let me get this up on your screen with the mute button going so that I can actually talk about this. We're going to talk about the invasion of Panama. Why? Because there is a lot of parallels in between the United States and Venezuela and the United States and Panama. What the U.S. ended up deciding for its justification to invade Panama, number one, it had four distinct objectives. Number one was the safeguarding of U.S. citizens. Approximately 35,000 Americans were in Panama, and there was some different clashes that were taking place, but most notably, a United States Marine ended up getting his head blown off at a checkpoint down there. Then we had defending democracy and human rights. Manuel Noriega had elections and they believed to be false elections, and that they were actually won by a guy named Indara. Then we also had to combat drug trafficking down in there. Noriega was indicted in U.S. courts for drug-related charges, just like Maduro has been. And then we also have to protect the integrity, of the treaties for the canal. Now, this is where we start to differ, where the U.S. has no interest as far as like treaties in Venezuela, and Maduro is not denying any of those, at least that I am aware of. All right, so it was packaged and sold to the American people as self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, particularly protecting U.S. citizens abroad. All right. And then you had the reliance on different treaties like the UN Charter, the OAS Charter, and the canal treaties, which were cited by the state as a basis under the international law. Now, Noriega did have formal indictments by the U.S. federal courts. Panama Assembly did declare a state of war with the United States, and there were direct armed incidents, particularly that Marine officer killed and harassment of U.S. troops, along with a couple other things. Now, how did the international courts end up seeing that, or everybody else? The UN General Assembly ended up passing a resolution calling the invasion a flagrant violation of international law. Now, remember that in one case, we actually had the protection of U.S. citizens, and we had Venezuela that was declaring war on, Panama that was declaring war on the United States of America. OAS condemned it and demanded that the U.S. ended up withdrawing. And then you had numerous other scholars, just like we have right now. They're calling all of this crap illegal. Now, inside of Venezuela, we have the side of them being declared a narco state, and the U.S. DOJ indicting Nicolas Maduro and 14 current or former members of the Venezuelan officials in 2020 for narco terrorism and drug trafficking. All right. And they accuse them of partnering with the FARC, which is over inside of Colombia primarily. And they're a huge freaking problem. In November of 25, U.S. designated, Cartel de los Soles, a foreign terror organization. And that is particularly tied to Maduro as far as the U.S. government is concerned. And CFR Conflict Tracker noted that in August of 25, Trump signed a secret directive that ended up authorizing the Pentagon to use military force against select Latin American drug cartels, dubbed the bounty on Maduro to $50 million. Right, so he doubled the bounty on Maduro from $25 million to $50 million and started targeting specific Latin American drug cartels. Now, that could be done in airstrikes. That can be done by giving intelligence to like foreign, forces that are on the ground. It can be done in a ton of different ways. All right. Now, we have since conducted 21 airstrikes against those narco vessels that are traveling through the Caribbean, making their way towards the United States. And as far as the White House is concerned, it's all gravy. Same thing with the Department of War, and numerous. I feel like our house is pretty much divided on this one. And I bring all of this up because internationally, underneath the law, the biggest sticking point that we ended up having was inside of Panama. We had, and again, these are in very close geographical location, right? Inside Panama, not only did we have U.S. interests in the canal, not only did we have U.S. citizens down there that we needed to protect, but in addition to that, we also had Noriega declaring war, right, against the United States of America. So the things that are parallel here between these two situations is the leader, of these two countries has been criminalized in the U.S. courts. They are both designated as a narco state or framed as a narco state, sending drugs and stuff up to the United States. And you also have a contested democracy in both of these places, where you have Noriega in Panama, and then you also have Maduro over inside of Venezuela. And again, Trump has been very outspoken against Maduro down inside Venezuela. Where the big issue comes into place, that the big difference is any treaties and the U.S. presidents inside of that country. So far, I haven't heard an argument from the United States government talking about protecting U.S. interests, protecting U.S. citizens down over inside Panama. Like I said, we had formal treaty rights and shared responsibility over the Panama Canal. And we had about 35,000 U.S. nationals plus several thousand U.S. troops over inside Panama at the time. And again, Panama's assembly ended up declaring a state of war with the U.S. And there was deadly incidences that ended up taking place. Inside of Venezuela, we don't have any of that, right? None of that has happened. Not any of it. Maduro has started spinning up his military, started spinning up his air force. He's been dancing on the stage, singing John Lennon, but none of that is really of any significance toward the United States of America. When the U.S. ended up invading Panama to dismantle that regime, it was very successful. But we don't have that ability, in my opinion, in this case. And so when we're looking at this from that perspective, when you say, okay, well, the UN ended up saying that it was illegal for us to go into Panama, even though we had way more grounds, I don't think the United States really has a legal basis for invading Panama. What we do have a legal basis for, however, is targeting the narco terrorists, and that is going to be with our Air Force and with our Navy. Right? We've got so much freaking firepower on those boats that we can do basically just about whatever we want. I mean, we could level that entire freaking place. It's absolutely insane the amount of crap that we could actually do in order to take them out and level it. I want you guys to listen to the amount of firepower. I think he does a very good job here over on Newsback. It's Mr. Higbee, former Navy SEAL, talking about the amount of assets that we have over there.
We just sent 11 warships down to the coast of Venezuela. That's almost 15,000 troops on board. Okay, those ships are in support of well over 100 aircraft on those things. We currently have 8 to 10 million pounds of munition, bullets, bombs, rockets, you name it. We have a lot. Okay. Oh, FYI, this is just one of our 11 carrier battle groups, should we need it. This is also me on board the USS Gerald R. Ford before it went to Venezuela with Secretary of the Navy John Phelan, which we were talking about them training for this exact type of mission profile. And this was a couple months ago. This is now floating off the coast of Venezuela, much of which is on board of that, a quarter-mile long ship powered by not one, but 2 nuclear reactors capable of speeds that would be pretty uncomfortable on a jet ski. Again, the ability to eliminate the entire country of Venezuela is not a question here. I think Maduro knows this, which is why Trump unilaterally declared Venezuelan airspace no-fly zone. The destroyers have enough Tomahawk missiles to render pretty much every airfield in the country unusable within a few minutes if we want to, and our own air assets can arm, fuel, and launch or relaunch or land a plane every minute to back that up. So it's, again, not a matter of whether we can, it's a matter of whether or not we should, and what avenue we take, and to what end result. So enter the Situation Room with me. See, in the military, we have this thing called a warning order. That's the overall brief would be given.
Okay, so now he's going to get into a couple other things that, in my opinion, really aren't that relevant to what we're talking about. What absolutely is relevant is this graphic that's up here on your screen and what we have to do. And the breakdown that I gave you for the legal case for Panama versus the lack thereof for invading Venezuela. And you take a look at that, how many freaking tons of munitions did he have up on the screen there? It was insane. 8 to 11 million pounds of munitions, 8 to 11 million pounds of munitions. And the amount of aircraft that we have, not to mention the B-52s and everything else that have the ability to fly down there and just start leveling this entire area. You guys can actually see flight paths that they can take in order to get down there, along with the F-35s, right? Like, we've got the ability to fly more aircraft down there and inflict more power. Even using standoff munitions, ladies and gentlemen, we don't even have to put some of these aircraft over Venezuelan airspace in order to get those munitions into there in order to start affecting some of those targets. So what do I see? Well, again, we have it leaked allegedly that Donald Trump has authorized the killing of some of these Latin narco terrorists down in there, such as the FARC, probably, right? And people of that nature, where a lot of that cocaine is flowing into Venezuela from and making its way over into the United States and Mexico. So if we end up firing things off, I would expect pretty much like we saw in the initial stage of Iraq with a shock and awe campaign, where we have all of these different narco terrorist bases that end up getting freaking hit by all of this naval firepower and U.S. Air Force firepower that we have the ability to project onto Venezuela from international airspace. We can do it. We don't have to fly over Venezuela in order to make that happen, right? With that being said, as that ends up taking place, there's also an opposition that is on the ground over inside Venezuela. We know that. We also know that the president had authorized black ops over inside of Venezuela, all right? And we do know that there is friendly forces on the ground there. I'm not saying U.S. forces, but friendly forces on the ground over there. So the most likely course of action for this is going to be a massive barrage, right? A massive barrage that is being coordinated with those who are on the ground. And that coordination effort is going to end up weakening Maduro's force, allowing them to go in and take over and put a different leader in power. That is more than likely what's going to happen. And that leader is then going to end up getting a buttload of money, probably through USAID, in order to make all of that happen. All right, once it goes into place, then that leader and their military forces will then take care of the drugs. Dark Horse E84 says people forget the legitimate president of Venezuela has agreed with the U.S. and is behind them in this action. I agree. And I think what's going to end up happening is exactly what I said. All right. It's just how it's going to go down. I don't see 15,000 Marines storming the beach of Venezuela to out Maduro. Now, I'm not saying that U.S. Special Operations troops aren't going to take part. I think maybe we're going to have some on the ground. They're going to be directing airstrikes and campaigns and things of that nature. But other than that, very little troop presence within the country, and they're going to be highly specialized. Other than that, we're probably going to rely on the local force to go in and take care of this. Yeah, I did admit to USAID. I know it's a problem. And I'm not the only one that knows. I've actually posted about this. And if you guys don't know that, I highly suggest you go look into it. USAID is an issue along with money that's going to different places. And all of that needs looked into. Elon Musk ended up coming out and stating that he ended up putting two simple lines when it went down to people spending money that's been allocated, simply like what line of budgeting it's coming from and what directly is it going for. And he said that ended up killing like 80% or something insane of the wasteful spending inside of the country when Doge ended up putting those lines. USAID is a problem, make no mistake about it. All right, we've been using it to funnel money to different organizations and to back different countries and to back like different political oppositions and everything else and anything else, right? So it's absolutely disgusting. So yes, special operations troops likely on the ground over inside of Venezuela right now as we speak. However, all right, you're not going to know about it and you're not going to hear about it unless something bad ends up happening. But you have a buttload of firepower over in the region. As a matter of fact, I would argue that all of the firepower that has been moved in the region is indicative of those special operations troops on the ground inside of Venezuela in order to actually give them some backup. That is a whole lot of scunion that can be brought in the event that something bad happens. Back in 2020, when we had those contractors that were on the ground, allegedly by authorization from Trump's office that ended up getting caught, and you had several of them put in jail. Well, we don't want to see that happen here in this one. And several of them got killed as well. We don't want to see that happen in this case. Therefore, we move a buttload of firepower in. And in the meantime, we blow up drug boats trying to pretend like everything's just fine and dandy. And I think that's more or less what's going to happen. When we look at, the historical precedents for everything that has been set, as far as, the invasion of Panama goes, quite frankly, we had way more justification to go into Panama with the Panama Canal, the amount of U.S. citizens that were there, the declaration of war that ended up coming out of Panama, and all sorts of other things. We do have, now I'm not saying that we might not direct airstrikes against Maduro. Maybe that will happen, but that's going to look really bad in the international community as an assassination, because you have other countries like Russia and China and Iran that look at him as if he's some sort of actual viable president. Okay. So that's likely not going to happen. Right? I doubt that we conduct an airstrike in order to take him out, but I bet we conduct shaping operations in order to make sure Maduro gets taken out. Because what we dealt with in Panama, which, by the way, if you go and you look at the invasion of Panama, the amount of special operations troops that were deployed into Panama, the way that they ended up using them, there was a huge failure within the special operations community, in my opinion, that went into that. So I doubt we're going to see anything like that. Tom Bone says, looks like 7th Special Forces Group will finally earn their paychecks or lose their cash cow. Depending on who you talk to. Oh, dude. That is the top comment of the day, my friend. 7th Group is either going to lose their paychecks or earn them, depending on who you talk to. Oh, I absolutely love that. Yeah, I think that they're going to do a good job. 7th Group's got its own problems, but I'm not going to trash on those boys. They get it hard enough. But this is like prime unconventional operation territory, being supported by massive amount of the United States military. So do I think that the U.S. government has the legal right to go and invade Panama? No. Do I think they have the legal authorization to do what they're currently doing? Yes. Dark Horse says local forces with the U.S. have already highlighted over 180 targets and over 200 people to capture and or eliminate, hence the large for, like you said, a large force, like I had said. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like all of those targets are going to end up being eliminated. And likely a lot of those like different locations with like the narcotics are being produced out of while we're at it are going to end up being a little bit eliminated. FARC's been a problem for the United States of America for a long time. I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up trying to target the FARC over inside of Venezuela, you know, what little of them may be, but this to me doesn't scream invasion. This to me screams massive amounts of firepower pouring over into Venezuela, supporting limited special operations troops on the ground, and at the same time allowing that partner force on the ground to go over and do the dirty work while we remain out of the picture. So are we going to invade? Likely not, just based off of historical precedents that's been set. Plus, ladies and gentlemen, this is a new era. Right? We've got Americans that think the war inside of Afghanistan was illegal, even though clearly Osama bin Laden ended up attacking the United States of America. Clearly we had members of Al-Qaeda there. Clearly it was planned from there. Osama bin Laden ended up getting chased out of Tora Bora and moving over into Pakistan, where he remained until we ended up killing him. So this is something also for you to consider. Right? You guys stop watching TikTok. Yeah, I like that comment down there. Stop watching TikTok. It's ran by freaking China, and it's going to melt your brain worse than any reel, or worse than any short that you're going to come across on YouTube. TikTok is a very huge problem. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me again for another episode of the Speak the Truth podcast. I appreciate every single one of you that ended up donating this morning. And please, by all means, make sure that you follow the channel, like, subscribe, and for the love of God, turn on the notification bell. Because when this goes down, I am going to be here and you're not going to want to miss it. And I'm going to be giving you guys up-to-date information and inside information that you're not going to get anywhere else. All right. Peace, love, happiness, and God bless, ladies and gentlemen. I am out of here.
Y que no se estacione y toda la prolongación del retén de que está cubriendo la calle. Son los soldados estos ahora ahí, que están ahí cuidando y caminando ahora que vienen estos aquí. Exacto. Aquellos que están parados allá